The Marvel Snap devs have released Snap's first ever imbalance patch, a completely off-the-wall patch that is going to change the next week of Marvel Snap and maybe the future of Marvel Snap forever. What is this new patch? Well, instead of doing a balance patch, what Marvel Snap has done is append a new keyword onto 20 cards in the game, all of whom are coupled up to celebrate Valentine's Day. So, as an example, check out this She-Hulk. She-Hulk, of course, is Daredevil's partner. They are in love, at least according to Marvel Snap at the current time. And when you play She-Hulk, your Daredevil will get +2. Similarly, when you play Daredevil, your She-Hulk will get +2. There are a total of 10 couples, which means 20 cards, which will get boosts from including the other in a deck and playing them. So, for example, with She-Hulk and Daredevil, the way the mechanic actually works is it's similar to an on reveal, but not exactly. So what this does is effectively your She-Hulk card, while in your deck or in your hand or on the board, will check to see if a Daredevil has been revealed. If you reveal the Daredevil after the She-Hulk will get +2. The Daredevil will also get +2. If, for example, you play a Daredevil on turn 2 and then a She-Hulk on turn 6, the She-Hulk in your hand will get +2, and then when you play the She-Hulk, the Daredevil will get the +2 as well. Now, these don't exactly stack the way you particularly want them to. Like, you can't, you say, play a power couple card on a Wong and expect to get that buff doubled, but if you play a She-Hulk and then you somehow have 2 Daredevils, or the more likely outcome if you play a Daredevil and somehow have 2 She-Hulks, cough cough Moon Girl, both of those She-Hulks will be 12 power. A couple important notes. This power is so-called green power, which means it can be Shadow Kinged, which means for the duration of the event, both She-Hulk, Daredevil, and all the other couples that are getting these boosts will be extra vulnerable to Shadow King, which should make him Marvel Snap's heartbreaker as this event rolls on. In addition, these cards do need to quote-unquote see you play the other cards. So, for example, if you play a Daredevil and then randomly generate a She-Hulk off of, say, a Loki, well, it won't actually get the Daredevil buff. The card needs to be revealed while you are in possession, control, or the card that you're looking to get the buff is in the deck. If the card is not created yet, it has not seen the card Daredevil get revealed. So what are all the power couples? Let's talk about each one of them and then talk about what the potential implications of that power couple are. Captain America and Agent 13, +2. Captain America and Agent 13 both getting +2 is actually, I think, relatively relevant, despite the fact that these cards themselves are not going to be played very much on their own. Captain America and Agent 13 are very cheap, and cheap cards that have good stats are in very, very high demand. A 1/4, for example, that Agent 13 is quite solid. A 3/5 with significant upside that Captain America becomes is also quite solid. I'm actually looking for this power couple to make a splash in a way that neither of these cards have been able to make since Pool 1. In addition, if you are in Pool 1, these cards almost instantly become an extremely, extremely strong option for anyone who's looking for reasonable cards to play. In addition, I think these cards are very solid budget cards now, where obviously their previous incarnations are not elite budget cards, but like you can replace a lot of good stats cards with these cards, and you will not be that far behind as long as you draw both of them. However, they are not the best of the newly upgraded budget good stats cards. Angela and Sera, +1. Angela and Sera getting +1 power is a little bit less of a buff than the other couples here are getting, and there are going to be some +1s and there are going to be some +2s, and I do think they were fairly judicious in doling out what is and is not okay in terms of power here. What I'm interested in here is this actually significant? Sera is not a card that we are actually playing for her stats. Angela is not a card that is particularly good for her stats. And I think a lot of the times I would want to play Angela as a 2/3 are going to be in decks that don't involve the card Sera, because I want to be playing her in bounce type stuff. Turn 5 is spoken for if you're a Sera deck. And I think that overall, this one, despite involving a very meta card in Sera, is not actually a big meta changer. Only getting +1 is one thing, but I think tying Sera to Angela, although that is obviously the correct pairing via the lore, and this is a lore-based event, does limit the actual upside of this change. In fact, I would probably be easy to convince that Angela going to 2-3 could just be what her new stat line is. All this change does is make me sad for when we used to have an Angela that was a lot bigger, and Sera actually used to be a 5-5 anyway. This one, I don't think moves the needle. Rogue and Gambit, +2. It's good that these cards got +2 because I find it hard to think of any deck that wants to play both of them. Gambit and Rogue, I think maybe will be going in a Surfer deck, I would say, but outside of that, I can't think of a single deck that actually involves both of these cards in any real sense of the word. And the reason these cards would be going in a Surfer deck is almost just because they're now better value. You know, a 3-4 Rogue is really good. A 3-5 Gambit is pretty solid too, especially on the final turn of the game. They are now great utility for a deck like that, but I am worried that a deck like that, pretty difficult to succeed with, and in turn, a deck like that isn't those effects away from being competitive. So I would say that right now, Gambit and Rogue, not likely to be needle movers in the competitive metagame, but still a good lore-centric pairing. I'm excited to see what could happen, but right now, these two cards do not have a lot of overlap in terms of their mechanics in the game, and that does limit how much of a power couple they can be. Invisible Woman and Mr. Fantastic, +2. I think this one is really, really good. I think that Invisible Woman just as a straight up 2-5 is insane. Mr. Fantastic as basically a 3-8 is insane. And I think most importantly, right now, those are budget versions of really strong cards. 2-5 Invisible Woman, 3-8 Mr. Fantastic. These are the kind of things that can prevent you from needing to buy a card like Gladiator, right? Like, you can run this stuff in Sera. You can run this stuff in any deck that is looking for cards that are good stats and also have reasonable effects. This Mr. Fantastic buff is honestly very, very solid. While I do think Invisible Woman is likely like along for the ride, she's along for the ride in a good way, which is to say, when she is an extremely efficient card to include in your deck, you very often want to do this, and making her a 2-5 is definitely extremely efficient. So whenever you're drawing both of these cards, they are absolutely immense. And I talked earlier about how some of these effects will be good for budget players. This is the one I think is going to be the best for budget players, and maybe the best overall, because these two cards can just go in any good cards deck, and that is an actual difference, because the place where extra stats makes the most difference is in those good cards, mid-rangey style decks. That's where 2 stats can really make a difference, and these are suddenly really good cards for people who don't have cards like Gladiator. She-Hulk and Daredevil, +2. I don't particularly expect this to be impactful, if only because there's very little overlap between decks that want She-Hulk and decks that want Daredevil, but you probably could talk me into experimenting with some sort of Daredevil, She-Hulk, Moon Girl type deck, where Daredevil basically exists to make sure that it's safe to drop all your points on the 5th turn and not actually play anything to allow you to play a million cards on the 6th turn, a la She-Hulk. Now, I think that deck is okay. Obviously, it loses to Mobius and Mobius, as do most decks built around She-Hulk. So I think, if anything, this is a relatively unlikely pair to impact the metagame. In addition, the stats that this is giving both of them is, like, weirdly not amazing. So She-Hulk is already 10. Going from 10 to 12 is not a big jump. Daredevil is 2, and going from 2 to 4 is a big deal, but most decks that can't afford to play Daredevil already can't afford to play Daredevil and can't afford to fit another card in to make him a 2-4 that would make him more palatable for them to play. So I think overall, this one feels like one of the less impactful ones, if only because at least half of it feels a little bit irrelevant. Making She-Hulk 12 is not the biggest deal on earth. That said, I do expect this one to be kind of free to include in decks like She-Not. Like, I do expect to see that. I don't necessarily expect it to be good, but I do expect to see it. Black Panther and Nakia, +1. These cards don't go in the same deck already, and they will not want to go in the same deck afterwards, and I really don't think this one does actual anything. Black Panther is only ever played in decks that are trying to, like, Odin Wong, do something stupid with that. In fact, him going to 10 power off of his first on reveal is arguably a downgrade in the context of, oh my god, I'm gonna get Shang-Chi'd, and especially because Black Panther is basically always a combo card. You don't want your combo card to get obliterated very early. I also expect this event to result in higher numbers of Shadow Kings on the ladder, Marvel Snap's newest Heartbreaker, and I just don't see it for either of these cards, especially in the same deck, and they have to be in the same deck if you want that power couple bonus. Rescue and Iron Man, +1. I get why they were careful with this one. Obviously, giving Iron Man any kind of actual stats is extremely dangerous. I'm sort of two minds on this one. On the one hand, it's like, okay, Rescue now dies to Shang-Chi. On the other hand, it's like, you know, a 4-drop dying to Shang-Chi is not the end of the world. And then you go back and you're like, yeah, but it's Rescue though, right? And the fact that Rescue dies in that way is actually really bad, because Rescue's effect doesn't activate until you play the card where in her lane on the next turn, right? So that means you can't use her as a 4/10 to get, say, a Scar proc. That happens after. And because of the way Rescue's ordering works, it doesn't matter if that card is face down or face up, she gets the power anyway, so you can't even use priority to keep her alive in the face of Shang-Chi. So I honestly think this one is a bit of a miss, if only because of the way Rescue interacts with her own mechanic. Iron Man getting +1 is cool. I'm not really sure I see the overwhelming appeal to get this guy in my deck now that he is effectively 2 power instead of 0 power, but like, sure. I just don't think this moves the needle for Iron Man. If you were already running Iron Man, maybe you consider running Rescue, but most decks that are running Iron Man were like Mr. Negative stuff, and you can't really do that with Rescue, so it's like, I guess this does nothing? Ghost Spider and Miles Morales, +1. I understand why they made this one a +1, because Miles as a free 5 power, or a 1-cost 5 power, is already quite good, and Miles going to effectively stature stats with this, with much easier ability to actually turn himself on, is pretty significant. The issue is the cost of running Ghost Spider in your deck. And I think what will determine whether this power couple ends up strong or not is entirely down to how easy is it to build a deck that wants both of these cards. Because I don't know if you know this, but Move has sort of diverged into 2 very distinct types of decks. And the first type of deck focuses on Move as a true mid-range strategy. This is like Kraven, this is Silk, this is Miles Morales. You are playing normal, fair stats. You are dodging Shang-Chi by not getting that big, and that's what Miles tends to go in. Now, Ghost Spider tends to go in the other kind of move, the kind of move that is all about making an 18 power Vulture, making a 40 power Human Torch, making a 24 power Dagger. That's what Ghost Spider does. And these 2 types of move tend to not interact very well. They don't go together like peanut butter and jelly. They go together like peanut butter and something that's gross with peanut butter. Sorry, I record these live. And I just don't know if there's enough genuine overlap between these two to justify doing this naturally. And if there isn't, I don't know if Ghost Spider is good enough in those other types of decks to justify being included just to get 1 or 2 extra points of power. I think it's possible just because she's a nice surprise card, and it's always easier to justify including a surprise card because it's a surprise. But I think this one is fairly marginal because of that overlap issue. Star-Lord and Gamora, +1. Gamora was already very much a reasonably playable card, whereas Star-Lord was not. But Gamora was a fairly playable 5-drop in lockdown style decks that actually had some reasonable use case. Now, I think we might actually be able to see, maybe we'll put some Star-Lord in those decks. Like, those decks tend to have an open 2-drop slot. It's not the end of the world. I think this could be not necessarily overwhelmingly impactful, but I think, a 2/6 is pretty compelling to me. Playing something like that after your Storm is pretty compelling to me. I'm not sure it's the greatest thing ever to include in your deck, but I definitely don't think it's a massive downgrade, and it does make sense in the deck. Like, these two cards can go in the same deck, and you won't actually feel like you're going out of your way to include them. Star-Lord is a fine inclusion in lockdown decks. He's just like, the 5th best 2-drop, and maybe now he becomes like the 4th or the 3rd best 2-drop, and that is a reasonable minor upgrade that I think is actually, the more I think about it, probably safe to give Star-Lord permanently. Like, is anyone going to be really mad if Star-Lord's a 2/3 that gets +3? I don't think I would be. Vision and Scarlet Witch +1. Vision is probably the most played card out of all of these guys, with the possible exception of Sera, whose playability has gone up and down pretty dramatically. I would bet that over the last year, Vision is probably the strongest of the cards to get a buff. I'm not necessarily saying most played, but he's probably the strongest. As a 5/8, he has been everywhere. He was in a wide variety of decks and has been for a very long time. And now as a 5/9, he actually has, alongside his companion, Scarlet Witch, an incredible amount of versatility. In addition, Scarlet Witch is one of the freest includes in most decks you can possibly get. This is a really powerful package. These two together are going to be able to go in a lot of different decks and be above rate stats with above rate abilities for their respective costs. And that is really, really compelling to me. I'm excited for this one for sure. Like, this is a high level card, Vision, getting a buff, and a good card, Scarlet Witch, getting a buff. And there are plenty of good cards decks that are down to run these cards together for sure. So I think that this could be one of the more impactful buffs. So that's all of them. Let's take a look at my ratings. At number 1, I have Invisible Woman and Mr. Fantastic, because I believe that that pairing is going to be an excellent inclusion in many good cards decks. At number 2, I have Captain America and Agent 13. Again, you see my bias towards cheap, good stats here. I think it's easier to justify playing these kind of new effects when they're cheap and you're just getting good value out of them. Cap and Agent 13, I'm definitely excited for. At number 3, we have Vision and Scarlet Witch. I just talked about this, but they are excellent cards already who are only getting stronger with this buff. At number 4, we have Angela and Sera. While I don't expect this to be the most impactful of these changes, I am excited to see what Angela and Sera can do together now that it's been so long without either of them without playing either of them in the same deck. It's been a very long time for that. At number 5, we have Iron Man and Rescue. And here is about where we draw the line of, I don't think these ones are going to matter too much. Iron Man looks solid, is solid. Rescue has those issues with Shang-Chi that I really, truly dislike. I don't think this is a major player. At number 6, we have She-Hulk and Daredevil. Now, this one I expect to see a fair bit as it goes into She-Not style decks, but I don't expect it to always be worth it. I just expect to see it. I would also want to see what people can do with this in a Moon Girl She-Hulk style shell as well. At number 7, we have Star-Lord and Gamora. I think these just go in lockdown decks, and it is a totally fine, good thing to do. I think looking at this list, talking through this list, you could very easily convince me to bump this one up to 5, maybe even 4, and then bump Iron Man and Rescue down. At number 8, we have Black Panther and Nakia. I don't think this does anything at all, ever. At number 9, we have Miles and Gwen. I am low on this because I can't come up with a reason to play them in the same deck together. However, I am willing to concede that might be worth investigating. And if you ask me to pick what of these I think I ranked too low, I would say Miles and Gwen and then Star-Lord and Gamora, if there were any. At number 10, I have Gambit and Rogue, who I just don't see together. I can't figure out exactly what deck I'd want to put them in, and I don't think Surfer is in a position to make a splash in the metagame with these cards in it. So that's it. This is going to be the next week of Marvel Snap. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Let me know who your favorite couple is in the comments. I am thinking it over, and I think I would raise Miles and Gwen. I would raise Gamora a little bit. Just reading through that list made me feel like I needed to revise the list, but I'm not doing that. I'm standing on business, and that's what you should do on Valentine's Day. You know what else you should do on Valentine's Day? Is subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thank you so much for making it through that video. I really appreciate it. Remember to let me know your favorite couples in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.